Mad Max. It's one of the most underappreciated franchises of all time. These 5 movies aren't the most even, but I definitely think all these films are enjoyable and certainly worth talking about. So with the release of Furiosa, now is the time to talk about them, and I'm gonna rank them all on this tier list. Is it silly to rank 5 movies on a tier list? Yes, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And I'm gonna start where this series began.
So I jumped in my car and I started chasing him up the road, and then he went down a side street and then the police were coming.
The original Mad Max is a very interesting movie because it is both visually and narratively different from its sequels. The film is a lot slower paced and has a much more analytical approach to how this world fell into the wasteland we all know and love. And it does that with some great world building. Max is a member of the MFP, and we mainly follow this group's struggle to maintain some sort of law in this future Australia. Although this was near future Australia in 1979, so this could be what Australia is like in 2024. To my 4% Australian viewers, is this what it's like over there? Let me know. But the film makes it clear just how hard it is for the MFP. Their vehicles and equipment aren't enough to deter any vehicular incidents. They're incredibly outnumbered, especially when criminals gather together into gangs. And society has fallen so much that law and order pretty much doesn't exist. The victims of this biker gang didn't go to court to testify against this dude, so he gets to walk free. The MFP is the last line of defense in this country, and it's a very thin line. But I have to be honest, I really don't care about the MFP officers. Some of them have more characterization than others, but really they're all just cannon fodder, and that kinda applies to Max himself. And the structure of this film really does not help to make Max a compelling main character, because for the first half of the film, he's barely in it. We get one scene of him and his wife, and then a few scenes here and there of him with the rest of the MFP officers, but he's rarely ever the focus of these scenes. And it's not until his friend dies that Mad Max actually becomes about Max. But from then on, I think he becomes a really sympathetic character. There's a lot of really interesting inner conflict where he's seen too much and risked his life too many times, so now he wants to live a quiet life with his family. And when his family is killed by the very same gang he could have stopped, that's when Mad Max is born. And I really like how this film is essentially just a really long origin story. Something I noticed about Max's origin on this rewatch is that it's very similar to the origin of another great hero, Spider-Man. You have a guy with really great abilities he can use for good, but doesn't do that and lets a bad guy go. The bad guy kills someone close to him, and now we have our hero. But of course, unlike Spider-Man, Max becomes a crazy vigilante who systematically kills all the gang members. I will say though, I think this film has the least interesting version of Max. I think his type of heroism works a lot better in the sequels, because those are set in a time where no heroes exist at all, which makes him stand out so much more. And I think it's really cool how this was essentially the beginning of Mel Gibson's career. I mean, without Mad Max, would we really have Lethal Weapon or Braveheart or that movie where he kisses Mark Wahlberg on the lips? Probably not. So Mad Max will always be special for that. Also, we spent a good amount of time with Max's wife and kid, but they're not the most interesting characters. Their whole purpose is to die, and while those types of characters could be interesting, like with Uncle Ben, they have too much screen time to justify how uninteresting they are. But she does play some nice saxophone, so that's pretty cool. But something that is interesting is all the stunts. The Mad Max series is renowned for its amazing action sequences and car stunts, and the original film is no different. There's plenty of awesome chase sequences, some epic crashes, and a bunch of scenes that make you wonder how they even pulled that off, especially when Toe Cutter goes under the truck. My goodness. The film's pacing is sorta wacky. I already mentioned how there's a big divide between the first half and the second half of the film, but the movie overall is just really slow and sluggish. It's an hour and a half long, but it feels like 2.5 hours long. But I will say the best part of the film for me was the villains. I think Toe Cutter and his gang of deviants were by far the most interesting characters in the film. They all have a central motivation of getting revenge on the MFP because they killed Knight Rider, another member of the gang, and they're all wacky and crazy and are a taste of the different types of villains that we'll see in future Mad Max films. And Toe Cutter's death is really something. The eyes popping out of his skull Looney Tunes style is so good. So yeah, the original Mad Max is a pretty mixed bag. There are some really great things here, but most of our main characters aren't very interesting and the film is very slow. So I'm gonna put Mad Max in C tier.
Humongous.
Humongous what?
Humongous.
Humongous what?
Humongous.
The Road Warrior is a phenomenal experience. When you think of Mad Max, the Road Warrior is probably the first thing to come to mind. This is just the perfect encapsulation of what this series is known for. Crazy looking vehicles, wacky characters who are wearing a bunch of leather, and sand. Lots of sand. I don't like sand. But something this movie doesn't get enough credit for is its story. It's simple but really effective because it allows Max to be the hero. There's a small oil rig that's being targeted by this group of raiders, and Max is their only hope for survival. And he has this well-written arc about slipping back into that hero role. He's constantly doing things seemingly out of selfishness, but he always ends up helping this group of people. I really like Max in this movie a lot more than in the original. This is where he became one of the best heroes in all of cinema. And it's kind of interesting that he's handicapped. I don't know, we don't always have main characters who need leg braces to walk, so it's different and pretty cool. And the sort of bond he formed with the feral kid is really wholesome, which, speaking of, that feral kid has become a pretty interesting character. In the film itself, he's pretty cool. He has a boomerang that he uses to absolutely deck this dude, but the really interesting part about him is that he's revealed to be the narrator at the beginning and the end of the film. He tells us about the Road Warrior and how he eventually grew up to be the leader of his people. And that's interesting because a popular theory that people came up with is that the feral child grew up to be the Tom Hardy version of Max in Fury Road. Tom's version of Max isn't as vocal and communicates with grunts like the feral child. And although I couldn't find an official timeline for the Mad Max series, most sources I found say that Fury Road is set somewhere around 2040 or 2050, which would make Mel Gibson's Max around 90 or 100 years old. Of course, the feral child would also be a little older than Tom Hardy, but that's more so because this timeline just doesn't make any sense. Personally, I don't think Tom Hardy's Max is the feral child. I just think Mad Max is sort of becoming like a James Bond role, where the character is played by different actors and can exist over many different years with no real timeline. But it's still a cool theory nonetheless. The action is also pretty cool. There's something so impressive about all these practical car stunts and all these high-speed chase sequences, and the whole final chase itself is so impressive. We have the tanker as the central set piece with all the action happening around it. You have all the cars to the side and behind that bob and weave and react to the crashes and stuff happening around the tanker, and then there's a helicopter pilot zooming around in the air. It's such a perfectly framed action sequence, and it's so memorable. Although the one thing I don't like about the action in this movie is the pacing, and that's because of the poor editing and the unfitting score. Most of this final action scene is perfect, but there are some moments where the film decides to focus on other characters, which really kills the pace. They spend like 2 or 3 minutes with this guy on top of the tanker. He takes an arrow, he sets himself on fire, but he actually manages to put out the flames. It makes the audience think, oh, well, that guy has survived a lot. Surely we didn't watch him survive all that just to quickly die right after. Huh. Yeah, that one really stood out to me. But the scene cutting away to the cannon fodder so frequently really kills the pacing. Also, I can't play a lot of the music because copyright, but it just really doesn't fit these action sequences very well and really slows them down. But no amount of criticism will ever diminish how awesome the finale of this scene is, where Humongous crashed headfirst with the tanker. Friggin' epic, dude. And speaking of Lord Humongous, I think him and his gang of leather-clad freaks are awesome. They're a great representation of how crazy this world has truly become. I love the crazy designs, I love the crazy vehicles, I just love these crazy characters. Mongoose is so funny. He's always climbing stuff and making crazy faces and letting his butt hang out, and he's a pretty decent sort of nemesis for Max and the feral child. And the Humongous is like a prototype Bane, and there's a lot of cool hidden storytelling with his character, like why does he wear a mask? What does he really look like? Why is his choice of clothing a Speedo? These are questions we'll never really get answers to, but are still fun to think about. But while his design and presence is really cool, he is sort of a flat villain. His motivation is just fuel. He wants the fuel, and that's all his character is. And that leads him to making some really odd decisions, like slamming headfirst into a tanker. Yeah, I have no idea why he did that. He's still cool though. The Road Warrior is a really simple, small, but fun movie. It has some issues here and there, but overall, a fantastic Mad Max film. But they killed the dog, so it goes in D tier. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually going in A tier.
I'm not the Messiah! He is! He is the Messiah!
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is a strange movie because for the first 40 minutes, it's a perfect Mad Max experience. There's an interesting story, there's a fresh new town with crazy characters, and one of the best action set pieces of all time. But then the last hour of the movie is a jumbled mess that introduces a whole new tribe of characters, is filled with inconsistent character writing, and is the worst thing a movie could be: boring. But let's focus on the positives first. There is a really cool setup to this new Mad Max adventure. He loses all his stuff to the pilot from the last movie and... Hello? Wait, what do you mean that isn't the pilot from the Road Warrior? You're telling me there are two different pilot characters in two different movies played by the same actor? That seems like an odd choice, but whatever. We'll go with it. Max tracks the pilot to this town, and here is the best part of the entire film: Barter Town. What an incredible set piece. As Max slowly makes his way through the town, we see all the incredible set decoration. There is so much visual storytelling about this community built within this apocalyptic world, and the different characters and extras are so interesting. All the background characters are so lively, and you can imagine different stories for each of them. This is very reminiscent of the cantina scene in Star Wars, with all the cool aliens. And the main characters of Bartertown are awesome as well. Master Blaster as a sort of combo character is interesting, and together they make for a cool minor antagonist for the beginning of the film. Master is a borderline tyrant in Bartertown, and Blaster is a really threatening enemy for Max to fight. I also like Iron Bar. I don't understand what's up with the other face he has, but I respect it. And of course, Auntie is a really memorable character. Really great design, really solid motivations of trying to keep Bartertown together, and a fantastic performance by Tina Turner. On paper, she has all the makings of a great villain, but like the movie itself, her writing takes a huge nosedive in the second half. But we'll talk about that in a second. This film's crowning jewel is without a doubt the Thunderdome sequence. Two men enter, one man leaves. This cage fight between Max and Blaster is so creative and a lot of fun. The bungee cords, the different array of weapons, and the interactive crowd who sometimes take a stabbing all help to make this one of the most memorable action sequences ever made. And there's a lot of good fun with Max trying to find his whistle to get the upper hand on Blaster. And when he does get that upper hand, Max has a really good character moment where he refuses to kill Blaster when it's revealed that he's a kid. And just in general, I still really like Max's characterization in this film. He's tough, he's mean, but he's still a hero at heart and still puts his life on the line for people who need it. Which leads into the second half of the film. And I'm sorry, but this is just terrible. Why do we uproot the entire film to go on this side quest with this tribe of children who have nothing at all to do with Bartertown or everything else this film already set up? I guess it's kind of cool how these kids have their own way of life with beliefs and prophecies. And there's a somewhat interesting conflict when Max reveals he's not their prophesized captain, and the tone becomes very inconsistent from this point forward. There are still some really serious, gritty Mad Max scenes here and there, but there are also a bunch of wacky, kid-friendly adventure stuff which feels so out of place. It's also during this scene with the pigs that Max and the kids agree to take Master and escape, and the writing here does not make any sense at all. So because Master, the only person who can make methane gas, is taken, Auntie goes after him and there's a big huge action scene. But I feel like Max would have no issue giving up Master in exchange for the kids' safety, because it's not like Master is a saint. He was a menace in Bartertown. And I know that Auntie went on that big speech about how she was going to kill the people who stole Master, but there really isn't anything to indicate that she actually would. Auntie is not a villain at all. She created a functional community with functional laws. It's a rough community, but it's a rough world. Her sentencing Max to the desert sounds like a villainish thing to do, but it's really not. He broke the law and was fairly punished for it. And also when Max makes his big heroic sacrifice and stays behind so the kids could fly off, Auntie doesn't kill Max or imprison him. She lets him go. People refer to Auntie as the villain of the movie, but it's so poorly written that I can't possibly see how she's any worse than Max or anyone else. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is so disappointing. It showed so much promise in the first half, but the last hour or so is just awful. So I'm gonna throw it in D tier. Alright, let's be real for a minute. I already know this is the best film of the series. You already know this is the best film of the series. Mad Max Fury Road is straight up one of the greatest films ever made. First of all, the action is absolutely spectacular, and this is because the film is paced and structured very well. I know in movie trailers, they say stuff like, it's a non-stop action thrill ride. But this movie really is a non-stop action thrill ride. It's just one big chase through the wasteland, which gives the film a constant driving force, and the individual action scenes on this journey feel properly spaced out. There's never too much nor too little action. Also, I don't think you need me to tell you just how incredible the stunts are in this film. There's a bunch of cars and trucks zooming all over the place. You have guys flying around on poles. And heck, look at this dude and his guitar. This movie is full of awesome set pieces and character designs, but I don't think anything beats the flaming guitar rig. And there's a bunch of memorable action sequences like Max's chase in the tunnels, the sandstorm sequence, the fight between Max and Furiosa, their escape from the canyon, their trudge through the swamps, and of course the whole final fight. I can go on and on about the action in this film. It's perfect. This movie also has some of the best world building of the series. We've seen communities and towns in this wasteland before, but this is a kingdom. It's a tyrannical oasis with water access, plants, and milk. Just don't ask where the milk comes from. And a fully armed force, the War Boys. I think these characters are the most culturally impactful part of the entire film. I still hear people shouting,
"Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!"
And I remember in 2015, people online would spray edible paint in their mouth.
I will be shiny and chrome, and you will be dark!
And as an armed force, they make sense in this world. They're a collection of people who have terminal cancer and aren't gonna live long or live for anything. Then a certain someone gives them a religion based around dying in combat to go to Valhalla, which is great at serving as their motivation for all the crazy stuff the War Boys do. And speaking of that certain someone, Immortan Joe is hands down the best villain of the entire franchise. He's just straight up evil and disgusting. He treats his subjects and his wives like property. He keeps all the resources for himself, and his gross nature is reflected in his character design. He has a disease-ridden body, he needs a respirator, and he wears stained, transparent armor. What a gross little gremlin man who gets a deserving and memorable death. Also, it's really cool how he's played by Hugh Caseburn, the actor who played Toe Cutter in the original film. And unlike the pilots from 2 and 3, Toe Cutter and Immortan Joe are very different characters. Also, our group of heroes are really well developed. Nux is probably my favorite side character in this franchise. He has a very well told arc of breaking away from his cult-like beliefs and finding a group of people he wants to fight for. And his sacrifice at the end of the film feels like a natural conclusion to his character and is actually really sad. Just his little as he saves the girl he loves gets me every time. Also, Nux is played by Nicholas Hoult, and I have to point out when there's another Nick in a movie. And we should probably talk about Max. Big elephant in the room. He's now played by Tom Hardy. And I gotta say, I think he did a good job filling Mel Gibson's shoes. He is missing a lot of charm and charisma that Gibson had in Beyond Thunderdome, but honestly, that could just be because that film is so tonally inconsistent, and also because there's a lot of lore that we haven't seen yet. He has visions of these different people throughout the film, and I don't know who any of them are. I guess we'll find out in that Fury Road prequel film soon, so that's cool. But those dead people could be the reason why Max is so closed off in this film. And a lot of Max's core character is still present. He's a survivor first and foremost, but as he gets closer to these other characters, he sees their potential for good and fights with them to remove Immortan Joe from power. But there is a controversial element to his character, and that's the fact that he's not the lead of the film. He's the co-lead alongside Furiosa. And I think she's another fantastic character. She's got a good design, solid motivations of getting back home and bringing these young women to safety, and a really well written story arc about finding redemption. And Theron does a good job in this role. She's for sure one of the highlights of the movie. Mad Max Fury Road is as close to a perfect film as any movie could be. And I kind of breeze through this ranking because I imagine everyone else feels the same way. So I'm gonna slap it in S tier and move on to the newest and final film.
Don't worry, but you got your right arm, and that's what counts, right?
You're right, brother.
Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, is an interesting piece of film because it doesn't feel like your typical movie. It feels more like a recreation of historical events. The film is structured into 5 different parts that span the many years of Furiosa's life, and these parts feature narration from a third-party historian. It's a very cool and very different way to frame this saga, although this story structure does lead to some issues. For one, it makes the film very slow. Because Because this is a prequel, we pretty much know how it ends, and it feels like the film is dragging along to the finish line, especially towards the end. Also, it doesn't quite feel like Furiosa had enough story to justify the 2.5-hour runtime. Some story beats could have been simplified, shortened down, and ultimately more impactful. But while the story felt kind of flat in places, most of the characters are great. Furiosa remains a fantastic character, and I found her story of growing up in this wasteland, learning how to survive, and becoming the character we all know in Fury Road really enjoyable, especially since, yes, she does only have like 30 lines of dialogue. She is silent for most of the film, and there was some worry if Anya Taylor-Joy could act like a young Charlize Theron, but I thought it was seamless. She really captured the character's mannerisms and demeanor. I also want to give praise to Aaliyah Brown, who plays young Furiosa for a significant chunk of the film. She had a hard job in this movie and absolutely crushed it. There's also a bunch of other side characters who I don't really care about, namely that Jack fellow who forms a close bond with Furiosa. He's not that interesting at all and is a representation of how the film struggled to have good side characters. But I need to talk about the best part of the entire film. Dementis, baby! Woo! Wow, what an incredible villain, and a very different villain. Most Mad Max baddies are brutal, or ruthless, or vile, but Dementis is just stupid. On the surface, he's this big bad king of the wasteland, but in reality, he's just a desperate failure, and his desperation makes him a really compelling villain because of how much it drives the terrible things he does. And the ending to his character is shocking, to say the least. Also, Chris Hemsworth is fan-friggin-tastic. He needs more villain roles because he is so good as a villain. This is the third really great supporting acting performance we've had this year, and I just know not a single one of them will be recognized by the Academy. And speaking of not being recognized by the Academy, the stunts and action are awesome. Just like with Fury Road, there are a bunch of super creative sequences and shootouts, and there are plenty of mind-blowing stunts. Just really impressive work all around. Although the CGI does look really rough at times. There's a bunch of obvious green screens and fake looking environments, and the film just doesn't look as good as Fury Road did. It could be because of the poor CGI or because the cinematographer is different, but there aren't as many gorgeous shots as there was in the previous film. So I have to say, I was kind of let down by Furiosa. It's definitely not a bad movie, it's just not on the same level as Fury Road. So hopefully George Miller can continue making these movies so we don't have to wait 9 years between films again, but with Furiosa's box office returns, that might not be likely. I friggin' hate it here, man, this sucks. All in all, Furiosa is still a solid film, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. I did not intend to have one movie per tier, but I guess it kind of worked out like that. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to comment your ranking down below, and if you want to watch another ranking, click here to watch my DCEU ranking, or you can click here to watch the video that YouTube picked out just for you.